Welcome to another deep dive, everyone. Ready to learn some more English with us today?
Always ready for a good deep dive. We're going to focus on practical English you can use every day.
Perfect. And to help us do that, we're going to listen in on a conversation between two friends, Alex and Ella. They're at a secondhand bookstore trying to find a good deal on a textbook.
Sounds relatable. Who doesn't love saving money, especially when it comes to textbooks?
Right. So today's deep dive is all about secondhand bookstore.
I'll be Ella.
And I'm Alex. Let's jump right into that dialogue.
Hi, Alex. Wow, look at all these secondhand textbooks. They're in great condition.
You're right, Ella, and the prices are reasonable too.
I need to browse through the science section. I'm looking for a biology textbook.
Oh, look. The previous edition of this book is much cheaper than the new one.
Really? Does it have any highlighting or notes inside?
Let me examine it carefully. Just a few pencil marks that can be erased.
Perfect. I'll purchase this one. It will save me a lot of money.
See? Told you it'd be a fun and easy conversation, even for beginners.
Absolutely. And like I mentioned, this type of situation, super common in English-speaking countries.
Yeah, secondhand bookstores are everywhere, and they're great places to find deals. Okay, let's go back and break down some of those key phrases and words.
Sounds good.
So Ella started off strong. They're in great condition.
Right. Meaning, even though they're secondhand, the books look practically new.
Not damaged, not dirty. Looking good. You can use in great condition for lots of things, not just books.
True. Like the car is in great condition despite being 10 years old.
Exactly. And then Alex chimed in with, the prices are reasonable too.
Reasonable prices just means the price is fair, not too expensive.
You could say, the food at that restaurant is delicious and the prices are reasonable.
Or, I found a reasonable hotel near the airport.
Both good examples.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, next up, Ella said, I need to browse through the science section. What does browse mean?
Browse means to look around casually. You're not searching for anything specific, just kind of seeing what catches your eye.
Like when you're browsing clothes in a store or browsing the internet, just exploring.
Exactly.
Okay. Then Alex found a previous edition of the textbook.
Ah, yes, the previous edition. That's the older version of the textbook.
Which, as Alex pointed out, can be way cheaper than the new edition.
Definitely a good tip for anyone on a budget.
For sure. Now, Ella asks a very important question. Does it have any highlighting or notes inside?
Yeah, that's a big one for a lot of people when buying used textbooks. Some people love a clean book, while others don't mind notes or even find them helpful. Have you ever bought a previous edition textbook to save money and found a bunch of notes? Let us know in the comments.
I'm definitely team clean book, personally.
Yeah.
But back to the dialogue, Alex says, let me examine it carefully.
Examine means to look at something very closely, right? Like really checking it out.
Yeah, in this case, he's looking for any damage or writing in the book, like a doctor examining a patient.
Huh, good one. And then Alex finds just a few pencil marks that can be erased.
Which is good news for Ella.
Definitely, because who wants a book full of pen marks you can't get rid of?
Right. So many used books have all kinds of marks in them. And that leads us to Ella's final line. It will save me a lot of money.
Always a good feeling.
It sure is. And honestly, that's a common reason why many people choose to buy used items in the first place.
Totally agree. It's great to learn new words, right? But knowing how to use them in real life, that's even more important.
For sure. That's one of the reasons I love using dialogues like this one to learn English. It helps us see how people actually use the language, out in the wild.
Definitely. It's not just about memorizing a bunch of grammar rules. It's about understanding how people actually talk and communicate.
Exactly. So what else can we learn from this dialogue between Alex and Ella?
Well, Ella says, I need to browse through the science section, right? And that tells us something interesting about bookstores in English-speaking countries.
Oh, like what?
It shows us that bookstores are usually organized into different sections. You've got your fiction section, nonfiction, the children's section, and so on.
Oh, I see, I see. So if you know what you're looking for, you can just go straight to that section.
Exactly. It makes finding the book you want so much easier.
That's a good tip. I always get lost in bookstores. There are just so many books.
Me too. But knowing how the bookstore is organized can definitely help you find your way around.
Definitely helpful. So let's look at another interesting phrase from our dialogue. Alex says, the previous edition of this book is much cheaper than the new one.
Ah, the classic textbook dilemma. New editions seem to come out all the time, and they can be so expensive.
Ugh, tell me about it. Textbook prices are crazy these days. Buying a previous edition can definitely be a good way to save some cash.
Exactly. Often the content isn't even that different from the new edition, just the price tag.
True, true. A lot of students are on a pretty tight budget, so finding ways to save money is always a priority.
And buying used is a great way to do that.
Good for your wallet, good for the planet. Everyone wins.
Absolutely. You're basically giving the book a second life. Okay, let's go back to Ella's question. Does it have any highlighting or notes inside?
Such an important question when buying used textbooks.
Right. Some people don't mind highlighting or notes at all. Some people actually like it. But then others, they want a totally clean book. What about you? Do you have a preference?
Oh, I'm definitely team clean book. It's got to be
Yeah.
pristine. But yeah, good question to ask before you buy. Okay, moving on. Alex says, let me examine it carefully.
Examine just means to look at something really closely, right? Making sure everything's okay with it.
Exactly. He's checking to see if there's any damage or writing in the book, like a detective at a crime scene.
Haha, love it. So what does Alex find?
Well, he finds just a few pencil marks that can be erased.
Ooh, good news. That means the book is still in pretty good shape.
And even better, they're just pencil marks, so they could be easily erased.
Yeah, definitely not as bad as finding a bunch of pen scribbles you can't get rid of.
Nightmare. Okay, so all's well that ends well, right? Ella decides to buy the book.
Yep. And her reasoning, it will save me a lot of money.
Music to any student's ears. And really, that's one of the biggest reasons why people buy used things.
Totally agree. Saving money is always a good thing. Okay, let's take a moment to review some of those key vocabulary words we've been talking about. First up, sections in a bookstore.
Right. Remember, bookstores are usually divided into different sections to help you find what you're looking for,
And we talked about previous editions of textbooks.
which are basically just older versions of the book. But they can be way cheaper than the brand new editions.
And then we talked about the dreaded highlighting and notes inside used books.
Some people love them, some people hate them. It really just comes down to personal preference,
And then we had Alex examining the book carefully.
meaning he was giving it a good look over, checking for any damage or problems.
And lastly, those pencil marks that could be erased.
Thankfully, they were pencil and not pen. All right, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive.
We have. And learned some super useful words and phrases along the way.
Now, before we move on, I'm curious, have you ever bought a used textbook?
Oh, tons of times. It's a lifesaver. And sometimes you even find some pretty interesting notes and highlighting inside.
Really? Tell me more.
One time, I bought a used history textbook, and the previous owner had highlighted all the important dates and names. It was actually super helpful.
Wow. It's like having a little study buddy from the past.
Right. It made me realize that used textbooks aren't just about saving money. They can actually give you a unique perspective on the material.
That's a great point. It's like getting a glimpse into someone else's mind and how they learned.
Exactly. It makes you appreciate used books even more.
Me too.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the practical benefits of buying used textbooks, like saving money and being eco-friendly. But there's also a cultural aspect to it, too.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, in a lot of English-speaking countries, buying used goods is super common and even encouraged. It's seen as being smart, resourceful, and responsible.
So it's not just about saving a few bucks.
Right. It's about being mindful of your resources and reducing waste.
Being sustainable.
Exactly. And I think this idea of practicality and resourcefulness is something you see in many aspects of life in English-speaking cultures, not just when it comes to shopping.
That's a really good point. So Alex and Ella aren't just saving money, they're also participating in a cultural practice that values making the most of what you have.
Exactly. It might seem like a small action, but it actually reflects a much bigger idea. Now, I think it's time to talk a little bit about pronunciation. There are a few words and phrases from the dialogue that can be a bit tricky for English learners.
Definitely. Should we start with in great condition?
Yeah, that's a good one. What's important to keep in mind when pronouncing this phrase?
So the tot sound at the end of great, that often becomes silent, especially when you're speaking quickly. It ends up sounding more like great condition.
Ah, got it. Like the two words are blending together.
Exactly. It's called linking, and it happens all the time in English. We often connect words together when we speak.
So instead of saying great condition with two separate T sounds, we say great condition all as one smooth phrase.
You got it. It seems like a tiny detail, but it can make your English sound so much more natural and fluent.
Great tip. Okay, how about the word reasonable? How do we make sure we're saying that correctly?
With reasonable, the key is the stress. The stress goes on the second syllable. Reasonable.
Reasonable. Got it. And the E in reasonable sounds like the E in C, right?
Yep. So it's not reasonable, but reasonable.
Ah, I see. That's a common mistake I hear from learners. But now we know how to say it right.
Perfect. Okay, next up, let's tackle the word browse.
Browse is pronounced with that long ow sound, like in the word cow.
Right. And the S at the end of browse actually sounds like a Z, so it becomes browse.
Browse. Got it. Now, how about the phrase previous edition?
With previous edition, the important thing is the linking again. We connect the S sound at the end of previous to the vowel sound at the beginning of edition.
So it ends up sounding like previous edition.
Exactly. And remember the stress pattern, it's previous edidization.
Previous EAD edition.
Nailed it.
See? English pronunciation can be tricky, but with practice, it gets easier.
Definitely. And remember, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Everyone does, especially when they're learning something new. The most important thing is to keep practicing.
And have fun with it. Learning English should be enjoyable. Right, I want to give our listeners a little challenge before we finish this part of our deep dive.
Ooh, I love a good challenge. What is it?
We've talked about tons of useful words and phrases today. So my challenge to you is try using them in your own conversations.
Yes, there's no better way to learn than to actually use the language.
Exactly. So next time you're out shopping, try asking if an item is in great condition or if the prices are reasonable. Or if you're in a bookstore, try browsing through the sections and ask about previous editions.
And don't forget to examine things carefully before you buy.
Yes. Okay, everyone, go out there and practice your English.
And have fun.
That's the most important part. Okay, so we've talked a lot about pronunciation, vocabulary, all that good stuff. But there's another really important part of language learning that we haven't touched on yet.
What's that?
Cultural awareness.
Ah, yes. You can't really separate language from culture, can you? They're totally intertwined.
Exactly. It's not just about knowing the words. It's about understanding the context, the values and beliefs of the people who speak that language.
Totally. So, thinking about our secondhand bookstore dialogue, what can we learn about English-speaking cultures?
Well, right off the bat, we see that Alex and Ella are looking for a used textbook instead of just buying a new one.
Right, and that tells us something about their values. They're being practical, looking to save money.
And you could even say they're being environmentally conscious, too.
Exactly. It's about reducing waste, reusing things, being sustainable. And I think this value of practicality extends to education as well.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, education can be super expensive, especially in English-speaking countries. So students are always looking for ways to save money on textbooks and other materials.
Makes sense. And buying used textbooks is a great way to do that.
For sure. It's a really common thing for students to do.
So this simple conversation about a used textbook actually gives us a glimpse into some deeper cultural values.
Totally. It highlights how practicality and resourcefulness are really important in these cultures. And that's why cultural awareness is so essential when you're learning a new language. It helps you understand the why behind the what?
I totally agree. Okay, before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a question to think about.
Ooh, I like where this is going. Hit me with it.
So, we've talked about all the good things about buying used textbooks, saving money, being eco-friendly, all that. But what about the emotional side of things?
Okay, I'm listening.
Imagine you found the perfect used textbook, the one you've been searching for, but it's full of someone else's notes and highlighting. Would you still buy it?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It would definitely depend on the notes. Some people would probably hate it, find it super distracting.
But others might actually like it. It's like getting a little peek into someone else's learning process.
Right. It raises all sorts of interesting questions about how we learn.
Yeah, like, is learning a solo journey, or is it something we do in connection with others?
Whoa, deep. That's a great question. And honestly, I think it's something each person has to figure out for themselves.
Absolutely. There's no right or wrong answer. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive for today.
I agree. We covered a lot of ground, from practical phrases to cultural insights. It's amazing how much you can learn from just one simple conversation.
It really is. It just shows that language learning is about so much more than just memorizing words. It's about connecting with other people, understanding different cultures, and expanding your view of the world.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So, to all our amazing listeners out there, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.
And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and give us a like. It really helps us out.
We'll be back soon with more deep dives into the fascinating world of language and culture.
Thanks for joining the conversation here at Kaz English. We hope you found it fun and informative. Don't forget to check out kazapp.uk. That's kazapp.uk for more tips, resources, and interactive practice. Keep exploring, keep chatting, and we'll catch up with you again soon.